Have you ever noticed how beer today is almost a star at gatherings, parties, and barbecues? Now imagine living in ancient Rome and offering a beer to a Roman citizen. He'd probably wrinkle his nose. That's because back then, beer was considered a second-rate drink. It did exist, yes, but it was seen as crude, unrefined, almost like wine's poor cousin. The Romans had a true passion for wine. It was more than just a drink. It was a symbol of culture, status, and civilization. Beer, on the other hand, well, it was seen as something people drank when they didn't have access to anything better. And this wasn't just a few people thinking that. It was practically a consensus among Roman intellectuals, politicians, and prestigious citizens. They knew that fermented barley could produce an alcoholic beverage, but they didn't value it much. To them, it lacked sophistication, it lacked tradition, it lacked class. One of the most respected figures in ancient Rome, Pliny the Elder, a true scholar of nature and Roman life, actually mentioned beer in his writings. But get this, he called it barley wine, almost as if to say, this is just a cheap imitation of the real good stuff. He spoke of it with a certain disdain, like someone saying, let's change the subject. This isn't worth our time. Pliny only mentioned that the foam from beer was used by women as a facial cosmetic. Yes, to him, beer was more useful on the skin than in the cup. Interestingly, while he barely spared a line for beer, he wrote page after page praising wine, exalting its social, religious, and medicinal value. That shows just how underestimated beer was, not because of ignorance, but because of a cultural choice. Wine was nearly sacred. Anything outside that standard was considered out of place. Hold on a second. Before we go any further, I need your help. YouTube only shows this video to more people if there's a lot of interaction. So without your comment, this knowledge might be buried and never reach those who need it. If this content makes sense to you, comment 1. If you disagree, comment 0 and tell me why. I want to see at least 100 comments so YouTube understands this topic deserves to be shared. Comment now and join this mission to uncover the secrets of ancient Rome. Now here's a curious fact. The Romans used the word cerevisia to refer to beer, and that word comes from Ceres, the Roman goddess of agriculture, the one who looked after the grains, the harvest, and abundance. Interesting, right? The drink was made from barley, a sacred grain in agriculture tied to the very essence of nourishment. But even with that strong symbolic connection, beer still carried the reputation of being a commoner's drink, something without elegance. It's almost as if they said, okay, it comes from grain, but we'd rather turn that grain into bread or an offering for Ceres, not beer. That shows how easily the symbolic value of something can be erased. When the dominant culture decides it doesn't fit its ideals, even with a name tied to a goddess, beer couldn't make its way into the pantheon of Rome's respected beverages. To really understand the Roman disdain for beer, we need to look at how they viewed the people who drank it. And that's where things become even clearer. Authors like Tacitus, for example, only mentioned beer when describing the customs of other peoples, like the Germanic tribes. And guess what tone they used? Always that condescending attitude like, look at what these barbarians do. The association was direct. Beer was something drunk by those outside civilization. Northern peoples, distant tribes, cultures that didn't follow Roman customs, and that created a sharp contrast. Wine was the symbol of order, culture, and refinement. Beer, on the other hand, became a symbol of backwardness, of primitiveness. So it wasn't just a matter of taste, it was also a cultural dividing tool. Drinking wine was almost like saying, I am Roman. Drinking beer meant being the other, the outsider, the barbarian, the one outside the system. Now get this, even a Roman emperor publicly mocked beer. We're talking about Julian the Apostate. He was known for his intellect and sarcasm and even wrote a short poem, an epigram, comparing the smell of beer to that of a goat. That's right. In his mind, and in the minds of many Romans, drinking beer was almost the same as drinking something foul, crude, and animalistic. This kind of public mockery, coming from someone so influential, only reinforced the common belief. Beer had no place among the cultured or powerful, and more than that, those who drank it were a laughingstock. It's clear that it wasn't just a flavor preference, but a deeply marked social scorn, full of judgment. It was as if they used the drink to measure someone's level of civilization. Despite all this rejection, the truth is, not every part of the empire was suited for growing grapes and making wine. In colder, more distant regions, like Gaul and Britannia, the soil and climate weren't very helpful, and that's where it gets interesting. Roman soldiers stationed on these frontiers began to drink beer, not by choice or status, but out of necessity. They were far from home, far from the vineyards, and barley was what they had. An amazing example of this appears in the Vindolanda tablets, found at an old Roman fort in Britannia. In them, an officer named Masculus writes a note, requesting more beer for his garrison. Just like that, the stock ran out and he wanted to replenish it. These records show that even with all the prejudice, beer was consumed in practice, especially where wine couldn't reach. It wasn't something openly discussed in Rome, but it happened on the edges of the empire. If this is making sense to you so far, do me a favor, show me a sign. Comment 1 down below so I know you're with me on this journey. And remember, YouTube only spreads this knowledge when there's plenty of interaction. If you haven't commented yet, now is the time. I want to see this video full of opinions, so this topic keeps reaching more people. There was a moment when beer almost gained space in Rome, and that was thanks to a man named Agricola. He was a general and also the governor of Britannia, a region where beer was more common due to wine scarcity. During his time there, Agricola got used to the local habit, and when he returned to Rome, he did something unusual. He brought Breton brewers with him and opened the first beer shop in the capital of the empire, around the year 83 AD. Yes, an official beer selling point right in Rome. But even with this attempt, the drink didn't take off. It was a drop of barley in a sea of wine. Agricola's gesture was bold and pioneering, but it didn't change the mindset of the Roman elite, who still treated beer as something rustic, almost shameful. In other words, the drink entered Rome, but not the hearts of its people. Over time, something even stronger cemented wine's place as the king of drinks in Rome: the arrival of Christianity. After the Edict of Milan in 313 AD, the empire openly allowed the practice of the Christian faith, and with that, wine, already appreciated, took on a central religious role, being used in Eucharistic rituals as the blood of Christ. The result? Wine's status skyrocketed. It was no longer just a symbol of culture, it became a symbol of faith. Beer, which had never had that symbolic place, became even more out of place. While wine made its way to the altars, beer remained in the shadows, seen as a drink of the lower classes, with no spiritual connection or liturgical tradition. So even where it was consumed, like on the frontiers, it had no place in ceremonies or religious celebrations, which were becoming increasingly important, and that only reinforced the idea that it was less. Over the centuries, beer's image became more and more associated with a specific type of person, someone who wasn't Roman. Northern European peoples, Germanic tribes, Celts, Scandinavians, all these groups were portrayed by the Romans as barbarians. And what did these people have in common? Among other things, they drank beer. So in the Roman mind, beer became almost an identity marker. If you drank beer, you didn't belong to civilization. You didn't speak Latin, didn't follow Roman customs, didn't wear a toga, didn't go to temples. You were someone from the outside, someone inferior. The drink, already poorly accepted, ended up symbolizing everything the Romans despised and feared: chaos, the unknown, the wild. Beer accidentally became an emblem of what was beyond Rome's control. And as unfair as that may seem today, that's how symbolic thinking worked back then. They weren't just judging the liquid, they were judging the drinker. In the end, Rome's rejection of beer wasn't just about taste. It was a cultural, political, and symbolic choice. Wine was part of Roman identity. It represented order, civilization, religion, and even imperial power. Beer, though it nourished, hydrated, and delighted other peoples, was placed outside the official story as something uncivilized. It's fascinating how much meaning a drink can carry, right? It wasn't just about what you drank, but what that said about you. And if you've made it this far, it's because this topic stirred something in you. So don't stop here. There's another video waiting for you on the screen right now, with a story that just might change the way you see the Roman Empire. Click it, and come with me on this journey through the lesser-known side of history. You'll be surprised. See you there.